In 1999, Shinji Mikami announced that an RE sequel was coming out for the PlayStation 2. This, of course, was referring to what we would eventually come to know as Resident Evil 4. However, what a lot of people don't know is that there were at least 4 Resident Evil 4 prototypes that were discarded or turned into something else entirely before we got the game that we knew and loved. So I'm Pliskin, and welcome to the first in a 3-part series in which we go through the road to RE4's development. Welcome to the first episode of 3 of a Kind. In late 1999, Hideki Kamiya and Nobu Sugimura work on the first RE4 prototype. Now, at this point in time, they wanted to do something different. A lot of the developers at Capcom were really tired of making the same formulaic RE game. And at the time, believe it or not, nowadays, there's a new appreciation for the classic style of Resident Evil. But back at this point in 1999, there was a demand, not just with the developers, but also with the players, to create something newer, something fresher. And this allowed the developers to really explore their creativity and come up with some wacky concepts. And this first draft is a great example of that. In regards to the story, a new character is introduced, a man named Tony Redgrave, who is described as being invincible and having superior skills and intellect. This character was supposed to differentiate himself from Resident Evil protagonists by being significantly tougher, cooler. With this idea of a tougher and cooler character, a lot of changes needed to be made to the gameplay. One of those changes involved the camera work. I quote, "The character does not look brave or heroic enough from fixed camera angles." This was Kamiya's reason for dropping fixed cameras and instead replacing them with a dynamic camera that would follow Tony around. The main themes or motifs in this game was still to retain that kind of RE horror, having Tony explore this derelict castle, having the developers go to Europe to study Gothic architecture, to make an authentic looking castle and creepy environment that Tony would have to fight his way through.
But now, in our time, they have risen.
Despite their efforts to keep this game feeling like an RE title, despite the major changes in gameplay, camera angle, and tone, eventually Shinji Mikami came along and said the game felt too far off from what Resident Evil is, and pushed the developers to take this original draft and make an original game.
As a child, I had powers. There's demonic blood in me. The power of both worlds.
On August of 2001, the original Devil May Cry was released. Now, some things changed with the actual release of this game. Tony became Dante, and rather than him having powers via a BOW implanted within him or some kind of virus infecting him, Tony was instead, or I should say,
Dante
was instead the son of a deific demon lord named Sparta.
There was a devil who fought for justice. With the power of his sword, he defended the humans from the dark days. And he became a legend.
So although this concept started off really based in Resident Evil, and today honestly, if we think about a Resident Evil character who has superpowers that allows them to overcome great tasks, I mean, just look at the newest Resident Evil game with Village. Ethan Winters can get chopped apart and put himself back together, keep on going at it, and what's the reason for that? Because he's infected with some kind of BOW weapon. So that sort of concept really stems back to not even Resident Evil 4 or 5 or hell even 6, but with the concept of Resident Evil 4, all the way back in 1999 with Tony, who would later become Dante. So even though this draft became its own game, that idea or the ideas presented in it are still very Resident Evil and made their mark on the series moving forward. In terms of how Devil May Cry performed and what it was like, it ended up being a spectacular action game that balanced elements of horror with exciting, nail-biting combat that hadn't really been seen at that level of intricacy in a 3D environment. It definitely made its mark and spawned its own franchise, which is one of Capcom's most successful. Devil May Cry 5 alone and its special edition release are still talked about to this day.
It's personal.
But what's important for the sake of this series is the mark that this prototype left moving forward. With the release of Devil May Cry, the first draft for a non-DMC RE4 started.
GameCube.
In 2002, a FOG version, as it's titled by fans, was announced as one of 5 exclusives for the new GameCube. Hiroshi Shibata directs this FOG version, which made it to 40% completion. It featured Leon and a girl that was not Ashley infiltrating an Umbrella castle, fighting zombies. Leon ends up getting infected with the progenitor virus, and obtains a hidden power in his left hand.
He has the power of both worlds.
The reason I'm bringing up this version after talking about Devil May Cry is because there are still a lot of themes relevant from Devil May Cry that was still being carried over in RE4's prototype. This FOG version that succeeded Devil May Cry as the next Resident Evil carried a lot of the same elements. The castle, the main character that gets infected with something and eventually develops powers from it, and a lot of the gameplay elements that were present in Devil May Cry were supposed to show up in this said FOG version. One of those elements or mechanics would have been the first-person mechanics that are present in Devil May Cry. You see, in Devil May Cry, there are these segments where Dante has to go underwater, and when he goes underwater, the camera switches to first person to make it a lot easier to maneuver around. Not only is there first-person traversal elements, but there's also first-person shooting elements, with the needle gun that you need to acquire in order to engage in combat underwater. Supposedly, this element of gameplay was supposed to be present in some way, shape, or form in this FOG version. Now, was Leon supposed to swim underwater with a needle gun? I'm not sure. Not a lot of people are. But what is sure is that Devil May Cry had already left its mark this early on into Resident Evil 4's development. This was the primordial soup that would become Resident Evil 4. And from this point moving forward, as seen in this FOG version, the mark that Devil May Cry left would never be shaken off from Resident Evil. In conclusion, Devil May Cry is, through and through, an RE4 prototype. I mean, hell, look at the guns that are featured in the game. Sure, the game deviates by allowing you to use swords and do flips and all that kind of stuff, but it still has that basic pistol, shotgun, and grenade launcher combo. This is definitely Resident Evil's DNA present right here in this game.
Power beyond my expectations.
And while it left its mark on Resident Evil and how it would change in the future, Resident Evil definitely defines this. They fed into each other to help develop that goal of making something that felt fresh and new. And while Devil May Cry didn't become the next successor to Resident Evil, it definitely built the bridge for us to get to the point of the Resident Evil 4 that we know and love. So I hope you enjoyed this and you learned something new. Join me next time to talk about the fog version later, and talk about where these next prototypes would lead to on the next step towards Resident Evil 4.